So today I have a track that sounds like this that my good buddy Kyle Turco helped me create, and it's a similar tempo and a similar vibe to the 1975 song I'm in Love with You. And in this video, I'm going to talk you through my process and workflow for what I would do if I was called to try to recreate the kind of drum part, drum tones, tuning, mixing for getting, drums that are in the vibe of this song, I'm in Love with You by the 1975. But why am I going to do this, you might ask? If you're a drummer who's ever collaborated with any musicians ever, especially if you've ever recorded, chances are you've had a conversation that went something like this. And the artist or producer says, okay, so here's the song we're gonna record. Okay, so for the drums, what we really want is drums that sound like, and then they insert the name of some popular music artist. Now, this skill of being able to hear a reference track that another musician wants you to kind of get in the vibe of and be able to kind of replicate it by getting the drum part and tones to kind of feel reminiscent or sometimes exactly like that song is a really, really valuable skill. And I have to warn you, even if you're not going to be a working session drummer or something like that, if you collaborate with any other musicians ever, this situation is going to come up. So I have some drums set up. They're right here. They're all mic'd up, and I'm just going to go through and try to recreate this drum sound. And I picked the 1975 for a couple different reasons. One, as a working drummer, the 1975 comes up as a reference a lot. I mean, I worked on a song last year that they wanted me to rip off the 1975 vibe a lot, and we did, and you can listen to that somewhere on Spotify. Two, I personally think that the 1975 always does cool percussion and drum stuff in their music. Admittedly, the song I picked today, I'm in Love with You, doesn't have, it's pretty middle of the road kind of drums, but they have cool drum parts. And three, George Daniel is the drummer for the 1975, but he's also the main producer. And not only does he work with the 1975, he's worked with Charlie XCX, Pink Panthers, Sam Smith, Caroline Polachek, and a ton of other people. And I think that, he's kind of a tastemaker in music production right now, especially in the UK. So it's worth kind of diving in to see, how he approaches drums. So let's get into it. The assignment, again, is we're going to take this song and try to recreate drums that sound like I'm in Love with You by the 1975. And by the way, if you like this play along, and you want to play along and maybe try this challenge for yourself, you can download for free. You can download the multi-tracks in the description, put them in your DAW and record drums to them. So that's the play along track for this is available in the description below. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just reference the song and listen to it and see what we hear about the drums. And keep in mind, let's look for what is the drum part, like what is the groove that the drummer's doing, and also what are the drum sounds? Like, is it a high-pitched snare? Is it a low-pitched snare? Is it a roomy sound? Is it a tight sound? All of those things. And then also, lastly, listen for percussion. See if you can pick out any percussion. So here we go. Okay, so hopefully that you were able to hear that. Here are the things that I was noticing. So one, the drum groove is pretty much just... And then later it goes a 4 on the floor. And as for drum sounds, I think we're pretty close with what I have, but this snare drum is wrong. So we're going to switch out the snare drum. And then for percussion, really the only thing I was hearing was like there was kind of like an eighth note shaker or tambourine, and then kind of like a doubled backbeat tambourine at places like catch. Those are the things that I was hearing right off the bat. First of all, I'm going to switch out the snare drum for something that's a little lower. So here we go. Okay, so now we have something like this. That to me sounds more like the pitch of the drum in the recording. There's also, it sounds like there's a reverb on the snare specifically that's giving it just a little bit of like, making it sound like a little poofier, and it like blossoms in a certain way. And also the room sounds around most of the drums are, it's a little roomy. It's not super dead and kind of like, super gaffed up stuff. So this drum doesn't have any dampening on it. These toms don't have any dampening on them. This kick drum doesn't have a ton of stuff in the bass drum. And I think all that's going to work. And to be clear, at no point am I going to research how they actually recorded this, because there are YouTube channels, Audio Haze is one of them, that I think do a great job of doing like super in-depth deep dives on, exactly what mic techniques these bands use or this producer used to do this, that, and the other thing. And that's amazing. And I think that is valuable. But personally, for me, I'm always trying to collaborate with musicians who bring their own thing to the table. And I think that if you're just going out and researching and then copying, pasting exactly like the microphones they use and the settings they use and all that stuff, it leads to kind of like this weird carbon copy of the thing, instead of you using your creativity and instincts to get to it yourself and do it the way you would do it. I think that's really what a lot of people are hiring me for. They're not hiring me to try to be someone else. They're hiring me to like give this song a certain feel or vibe in the way that I would do it. Also, doing deep dives and doing a bunch of research is super time consuming. And, if you want to become any kind of working musician, chances are you don't have the time to, if you have a song to record, you don't have the time to take a month to research and look at photographs and listen to interviews of how people recorded a thing. You just need to be able to listen to it and go, okay, the drums are giving me this kind of vibe, so I can use this snare drum, and I'll use these mics, and I'll lean heavily on these mics to create that kind of mid-range thing. It's a certain kind of workflow that you need to kind of build up to try and hear a reference and then try to recreate it yourself. And that's a very different thing than like going down the research rabbit hole. So today, I'm just going to be using my instincts, not doing research. All right, here we go. Okay, that's kind of the drum groove. Like, there's not much more to it. Again, there is some percussion in there, and it does sound like on the outro, there's kind of like this electronic hi-hat thing that does the kind of... It sounds like that little 16th subdivided kind of syncopated thing. On the outro, it sounds like it's an electronic hi-hat, but I'm just kind of playing it all hi-hat here. We're going to let the tambourine kind of give us our percussion layers, and I'm not going to worry about an electronic hi-hat overdub, but you totally could if you wanted to. And as for tones, I actually think these are really close. In the final mix, like after I get stuff recorded, we'll hop over to the computer and I'll show you anything that was interesting as I mixed it to try and get it closer. But for the most part, like, they're pretty general drum sounds. I think the really important things are kind of the reverb on the snare, and the drums are kind of like roomy. I think if you were in a recording setup where you only had a mono overhead and no room mics, this drum sound would be really hard to get, because it does sound like there is some room around the drums. It's not like super tight drums. There is some like life and air around the drums. So if you want to get this sound, I think it's really important to make sure that you have like some kind of room mic that you're able to get air and kind of put the drums in a space. And you can also simulate that. If you have two overheads, you can kind of duplicate that track and put a reverb actually on the overheads and try to make it sound like a room. You can mess with the pre-delay and stuff like that. But for me, I have room mics over in the closet that I'm going to really lean on for giving that like kind of air and space and like length to the snare. This snare like feels like, it has like a decay to it. And it's not just reverb, it's also like room mics and stuff. Okay, and for the tambourine, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use two different tambourines. You could argue that you could just play it in as one take and that would be cool. But I think for me, I'm actually going to try to play like eighth notes with one tambourine and then the tambourine that's playing on beats 2 and 4 to kind of reinforce the snare, I'm going to play that as a separate tambourine and just do the 2 and 4. And that way you get more control over those dynamics. So here's the first tambourine. It's got a really short decay. These are actually toy tambourines I got from Amazon. And I've taped them together. It's actually 2 child's tambourines. So let me create an audio track here. Okay. And this is the percussion mic I'm using. I actually use a ribbon mic for my percussion because a tambourine or a shaker is already really bright by itself. So I find that if you use a bright mic on percussion, it can just be really like too much. So I found ribbon mics are really nice for percussion because it kind of tames some of that harshness. And if you want to add top end, you can, but oftentimes I feel like I don't need to. As you could see, I started the tambourines before the loop started recording. And that's because I've always found that with shaker or tambourine or whatever, it's like really hard to lock in that first bar once you start moving. So if you're recording and you have the privilege, like just give yourself a bar of pre-roll and get that kind of the momentum of the shaker or tambourine going. And that first bar will be locked in. I'm gonna use this for the backbeat tambourine. It's a slightly nicer tambourine and it has a slightly more like top end kind of like, you know, whatever. So, all right, so I'm not going to do an in-depth walkthrough of every single thing I did for this mix, but I wanted to highlight kind of some of the things now that I've dove into it and checked out what we recorded. There were a couple things that I did to take this right to the edge. Now, typically when I'm recording for artists and producers that I record for, I'm not doing the final mix, but I like to get my drums as close in the direction that I can without kind of ruining it. So on all of the close mics, they're pretty much left raw, except for the room mic. I did a little kind of weird EQ on the room mic. We'll get to that in a second. But for the most part, all of the individual drum tracks here, you know, the close mic on the kick, the close mic on the snares and stuff like that, I didn't really do much to that. The things that I added were drum reverb, and then I added a snare and a kick bus that I put some processing on. So when I send this to someone, ideally they can just throw it in their session and it's like 85% of the way there. And if they don't like what I did on this kick and snare bus, because it's kind of aggressive, they don't have to use them. But I didn't I didn't kind of destroy these like close mics with like a ton of crazy processing. So I had these 2 mics, Cooper and Draper. They're kind of just mono character mics that I use sometimes. And I didn't feel like I needed either of them. So the tambourines are in here. By the way, this is the track that Kyle Turco did. It looks like a lot, but each of these things is kind of doing a little bit. It's kind of standard though. It's bass and acoustic and layers of electrics, and then just like some synth stuff. So tambourines, really easy. I did like an EQ on one of them and, you know, some other stuff, and you get tambourine. So and again, I track those separate so that I can have total control over that backbeat tambourine and the kind of eighth notes. Because ideally, you don't even you don't hear those as much as you just feel those happening. But that backbeat adds just a little bit of brightness to the snare drum. And here are the drums by themselves. Now, listen to the drums with no room mic. That room mic adds a ton of excitement. And another thing that it does is it adds this weird boxy mid-range, low mid-range thing that is in the reference track. When I was listening and trying to match my drums to theirs, personally, their mix is a lot more kind of squashed and bright. It's a lot brighter than I would normally mix. It kind of has this big like smiley face curve to it where there's a lot of low end and a lot of high end, but in the middle, it's really just saved for the vocal. That's not usually how my ear would gravitate towards. So doing this little experiment is kind of good to stretch and make you mix in a way that you wouldn't normally mix. With the room mics in, the snare drum gets this weird like boxy length to it that the demo or the reference track had. And then I kind of emphasized that in the snare bus too. I added some saturation, and then kind of this 400 area here, and I added more saturation in this like 2 to 600 range here. So this range right here, 2 to 600, it's this boxy kind of sound to it that normally a lot of people would avoid, but I really felt like the reference track did have that kind of thing with it. And those are the small kind of things that really can help train your ear to pick out stuff that get you in the ballpark of a certain vibe or a certain sound, especially one like this where like normally with snare drums, I'm not thinking, you know what this snare drum needs more of, like 400. But the reference kind of had it, so I put it in there. So there you go. That's a good look at the Pro Tools session and kind of the things that I emphasized in the mix of it. Again, the drums and everything we chose were good. So I didn't really do much other than, bus all the snares to a bus and bus all the kicks to a bus, add some reverb, and then kind of find that one EQ point in the room mics to kind of boost. But as you can see here, all the faders are like at 0 pretty much. The hi-hats turned down, the overheads are turned down a little bit. The room mics are louder than I would normally have them. But again, I wanted that room mic to add the space around the drums. So yeah, that's a look at the Pro Tools session. All right, so before we hear kind of the finished track, I just want to say that if this seems like a lot of work, like it kind of is. So if you are out there and you're a producer or you're an artist and you're looking for great high quality drums, feel free to head over to my website. I record drums for people in this room all the time, to producers and artists all over the world. And I love this stuff. So if this kind of thing seems overwhelming for you and you want to just hire me, please do it. Reach out to me on my website. I'd love to record on whatever songs you have. And now maybe you're a drummer and seeing this has kind of piqued your curiosity and you go like, man, I want to learn more about recording. I want to help with that too. So I have a course called Drum Recording for the Working Musician, and it takes you from not knowing anything about recording and only having a smartphone and how to record just by using the voice memo app on your phone and get good recordings with that, up to you only have 2 microphones, how to record drums, up to a couple of microphones, up to have this many microphones. And I walk you through case by case and how I would do it, different ways you can do it. I also work through different DAWs. I use GarageBand, Logic, Pro Tools, a bunch of different DAWs. So if that's something you're interested in, you can head over to the website and check that course out. This is the final result. Put down in the comments how close you think I got, and if you have particular artists or drummers that you want to see me do a breakdown of how do they get those sounds, drop those in the comments below, and here's the final result.